my topic today actually is a research program I have focused on the past 10 years. This is about issue that I am personally is very interested in, and I have spent a lot of time on this topic. It's about the public agenda dynamics from zero-sum competition theory to an ecological framework. And so first, I would like to introduce some background. So this topic, public agenda dynamics, and I call this as a kind of seemingly simple but not trivial problem in the field. Everybody knows that our public attention, especially nowadays, move very fast. And I just talked about the gun shooting that happened at MSU on Monday. And it was on the top line of the news media on Tuesday. And there were some news reports about that event on maybe Wednesday. And today, it's completely gone on news media, of course, in the United States. So that means media agenda changes very rapidly. And also, I think the public agenda, the same. A very famous economist, Anthony Dams, more than 50 years ago, and he argued that public attention rarely remains sharply focused on one domestic issue for very long. Even this issue is very, very important. And so this is, of course, is a description of the dynamics of public attention over time. But this description leads to a very, very important scientific question in communication research or in public opinion research, which is related to the agenda setting theory that was proposed by Macau and Shaw in 1972. The assumption is that public attention on social issues will change. And so that's why media emphasis on certain issues can have the ability to change public attention on social issues. So what has been emphasized by the media will be reflected on public agenda. So this is just implied assumption in agenda setting theory. And 20 years later, and Jonathan Zhu, and who was my PhD advisor, he explicates this assumption as a formal theory, and he called this as a zero-sum competition. Zero-sum is a game theory, and so that means the rise of an issue on public agenda is necessarily at the expense of other issues. And more importantly, this kind of issue competition will lead to the diversity and the volatility of public agenda. So that means maybe the public agenda will include more issues, and also the public agenda will change in a more rapid rate. And so this is what has been discussed in the previous literature. And the public agenda dynamics, actually, this is not just related to the agenda setting theory. And as Korsky from Ohio State, he has emphasized that how public issues are popularized and prioritized in a pluralistic societies is a key research question, whether it is related to the agenda setting or not. And so that means to me, this is a very important question because of my personal interest. And so I go to the literature and try to see how empirical studies have been conducted to understand the public agenda dynamics, whether it is purely zero-sum competition or it may have some other types of mechanisms there. I don't think this is a very complete literature review, but by doing a quite comprehensive literature review, I found that this issue, the dynamics of public agenda, has not been well studied, even when agenda setting theory has been proposed for 50 years. So starting from Zhu in 1992, and a lot of studies have been conducted with public opinion polling data, with content analysis, even with the digital data from social media. None of these propose a kind of conclusive solution or propose a settled answer to this question about the public agenda dynamics. As you can see from here, and a lot of studies find quite mixed findings about whether there is a competition or there is a cooperation or the social issues are completely independent from each other. So I started this line of research in 2012. And so at that time, we started to use very large-scale social media data to try to examine the dynamics of public agenda on social media. And then we move forward to propose some renovation and try to use innovative method to study this. So this is what I will introduce today. And first, of course, in 2012, and because the social media has becoming more and more popular and so important in the media landscape, so we think it's very good to use social media data and to understand the public agenda dynamics. But the social media actually, of course, bring a lot of changes in the agenda setting process. Say, for example, one prominent change or one salient change is that in the past, the only agenda setter in democratic society is the media. So the mass media will set the agenda. But with social media, everybody can have your voice. So the agenda setting scope has been expanded from a single messenger to multiple messengers. So the politicians can use social media to make their voice heard, and also grassroots opinion leaders. They can be a very, very important hub on social media. And also, everybody knows that social media has a lot of information there, right? Different topics will come and go at a very, very fast rate. So whether the social media will make the process more competitive, or will the social media make the public agenda dynamics turn into a more cooperative process? So that means different social issues, they may work together to recruit public attention. And also on social media, whether there are some regularities underlying the interaction between multi-messengers and the multi-issues on social media. So these are some new phenomenon or new questions emerge in the age of social media. And meanwhile, the social media also offers some very nice opportunities for us to answer these questions or these challenges or these changes. Say, for example, on social media, we have unsolicited measure of issue salience. We don't need to interview the respondents to say, hey, what is the top issue in your mind, right? Because we can mine social media text to measure what kind of issue have been discussed among the public. And also social media has very, very large scale information. So it's a very massive data set. And the third advantage of social media data is that they always provide very fine-grained time units. And it can be second, it can be minute, it can be day, and it can be week. And you can just manage and process the data depending on your own needs, right? So in 2012, I started to work with a group of computer scientists from Microsoft. And the first study we did and was published in Computer Science Journal and is a top journal in visual analytics, IEEE transaction of visualization and computer graphics. So in this study, we just replicate the zero-sum competition theory. And so we propose competition model, which was adapted from Jonathan Zhu's zero-sum theory. So as you can see from this equation, we have three components to capture different kinds of effects. So this one is to capture the carryover effects of public attention on certain issue. This is the public attention on issue I at an earlier time point. And so this one can help us capture the carryover effects. In time series analysis, we also call this as autoregression. And so this component help us capture the recruitment effects. So this means what? This means the media or the agenda setters coverage or discussion of this issue I will help us recruit public attention from issue J. So that means you distract others from audience from other issues. So this will increase your salience. Well, this component is media coverage of another issue, J, will distract your audience. So this is just the expansion of the classical zero-sum competition model. Of course, what we adapt here is that we include multi-source of influence in this model, because in the original model, and Jonathan Zhu, he just considered one source of influence is the mass media. But in this model, we consider the mass media on social media and the politicians on social media as well as the elite grassroots users on social media to see how different users, they will influence public attention on social issues. And so this is our theoretical framework. And in this study, we collected about 89 million tweets on 6 social issues during the 2012 presidential election, and from May to November 2012. And we use time series model called vector autoregression with moving time windows. And so I don't know whether you are familiar with the moving time windows. That means, say, for example, we set a 4-hour window, and then we will move 1 hour forward. So there will be a 3-hour overlap between these 2 time windows. As you can imagine, this model is quite complicated. So the results of this model cannot be presented in a traditional social science paper. We have a table or we have a figure. We have thousands of tables. So in this study, our collaborators, they developed visual analytic system so to illustrate what we found here. So this one is to this system, and all the input of this visual system is from our estimation from this mathematical model. So it tells you how different social issues, they will distract audience or recruit audience or the public attention from other social issues. And so this visual system has been showed as a demo in the lobby hall of the Microsoft Research Asia in that building. And so, of course, this is just one replication. So in this study, and although we find that there are some competition between social issues. But when we look at the results, especially with the help of this visual analytic system, we found that there are a substantial proportion of social issues. Actually, they do not compete with each other all the time. Instead, sometimes they will go in parallel. That means they do not interact with each other at all, that they are independent from one another. And in certain issues, at a certain time window, some social issues, they will cooperate with each other. So that means both of them will grow. It's not a grow and decline trend. So in the second study, we collaborate with the computer scientists that we further expand the competition model to a co-opetition model. Co-opetition is a combination of competition and cooperation. So this figure actually illustrates what we try to test in the second study. Is, say, for example, if we have 3 social issues here, so there can be 5 possible effects or scenarios that can exist on the interaction between these social issues. Say, for example, there should be a carryover effect from the public attention on this issue at an early time point on the public attention on the same issue at a later time point. While it can also be a kind of competitive recruitment. So that means what? This issue will recruit public attention from other social issues. So this is what we have tested in the first study. But we also find that there can be a kind of cooperative recruitment. So that means these 2 issues, they will work together to recruit public attention on social or another, on the third issue. So a very good illustration of this possible scenario is what is about the health and the environment. So usually we will consider these 2 as 2 social issues, but in scientific literature or in our daily conversations, health is always, or environment is always tied to health discussion, right? So these 2 issues, in a lot of situations, they will work together to recruit public attention on the third social issues like employment or social welfare or something like that. And meanwhile, we have the cooperation here, and also we can have the competitive distraction and the cooperative distraction. And so this means there can be more complicated interaction between social issues on the public agenda. But what are the driving mechanisms for issues, whether they will like to cooperate with each other or compete with each other? In our study, we think of course, the source of influence rose in opinion leaders or those key opinion leaders, like media, they will play a role there, right? If the news reports, they will combine these 2 issues together in public agenda, so the public will also perceive these 2 issues, they are related to each other, right? And another driving mechanism is what? Is the users. In their cognitive mind, if they perceive these 2 issues, they are similar to each other or they are related to each other. So this will also lead to the cooperation or competition. If two issues, they are not similar to each other, so that means they will compete with each other. But if they are related or similar to each other, so that means they may cooperate with each other. So this is the cognitive or semantic similarity between social issues. So this is the overall theoretical consideration behind our second study. And so based on all these rationales, we expand our mathematical model in the first study to we call as the issues competition. So this part is the same as the carryover effect. And so this is the same as we call as the competitive recruitment. And this one is we call as the competitive distraction. So this is the same as what we have tested in the first study. And we add two components here is the cooperative recruitment and the cooperative distraction. So we include this sigma here. So this one measures the similarity between two social issues. And we use text mining techniques. So we define a social issue and we can build a vector of words related to this issue. And also we can build a vector of words for another issue. And we use a kind of similarity measure in text mining to estimate the similarity between two social issues based on the social media data. And so this one can allow us to capture the cooperative recruitment. And this one can allow us to capture the cooperative distraction among social issues. And in this study, we try to measure the power, competition power of social issues. So that means whether this issue will cooperate, competition, whether it will cooperate or compete with other social issues more. So we define this competition power as the magnitude of how competitive or cooperative an issue is in recruiting public attention from the public. So that means we will look at the parameter estimates from the second term and the first term, because this is whether you can recruit public attention from other issues, either in a competitive way or in a cooperative way. So the idea is very straightforward, right? We want to have an overall measure of competition power. But statistically, how can we combine these two parameters or estimates together? This is a challenge for us, actually, in this study. And so we spend a lot of time on thinking about this. And finally, we go back to a very classical and simple correlation measure is the squared semi-partial correlation. I think if you have learned the correlation and the regression analysis, you should be very familiar with the squared semi-partial correlation. This is a type of coefficient of determination and to measure the pure or the net correlation between two variables when you have the third variable controlled. And so this squared semi-partial correlation has several desirable properties. First, it is additive. That means you can add the squared semi-partial correlation between any pair of variables together. This will lead to 100%. And it's normalized and is comparable. So that means we can compare the competition power of this issue with the competition power of other issues. Okay, so that's why after we did a lot of literature review and we found, hey, this old and classical measure works the best. And so in this study, we use the social media data. And now in this study, we expand the social issues from 6 to 10. And we develop a list of 3,300 keywords about 10 issues. And we retrieve about 600 million tweets posted in 2013 and from the American users. And so the data collection from this study is also very complicated. And so we started with the with the Gallup most important problem, and then we developed a list of keywords, and then we use some Google Correlate and to expand the list of keywords. And then we submit these keywords to the Twitter Firehose. So that's the original database of Twitter. In this study, and the tricky thing is that when you have this large volume of tweets, how can you classify each tweet to a social issue. And so we use a supervised machine learning approach called support vector machine. At that time, we don't have the ChatGPT and we don't have the these kind of transformer models. So SVM was the most cutting edge machine learning algorithms at that time. We use this SVM to clean the data. And so finally, we have 450 million tweets on 10 social issues retained for the analysis. And also we use the vector auto regression and to analyze the data, we use a moving time window as we have discussed just now. And so this is the model evaluation. As you can see, it's quite good. And always we can have a very high R-squared Y because we have the autocorrelation there. And the Durbin-Watson and D, actually, this is a key indicator to assess a time series model and to see whether there are some autocorrelation in the errors. And so as you can see, it's very close. For most of the social issues, it is very close to 2. So that means we well explain most of the variance in the time series, okay? Again, and as you can imagine, and this model also produce a kind of very complicated data. And so our collaborators, they develop a very nice visual system to visualize the
Evil River presents a quick overview of
Can you hear the sound here? Okay, so I can show you
the
this one.
dynamics of topic cooperation and competition. Topics like spending, general economy, welfare, environment and energy, international issues, and government and politics switched from competition to cooperation with the unfolding of the 2012 presidential election in the United States. Evil River allows zoom-in investigation into the dynamics. For example, with regards to pairwise similarity between topics, this in-place view shows that the arc connecting spending and government and politics is the thickest one among all other arcs. This implies that government and politics was most similar to spending in the week of November 8th. This is also the case in the week of November 15th and 22nd, where government and politics was most similar to welfare and international issues. Next, let's turn to the intricate relationship between government and politics and other switching topics with word cloud view and tweet list view. Let's take international issues as an example. During the specified time interval, the most prominent keyword in the word cloud is debate, suggesting that this is the most popular keyword used in tweets about the topic international issues. By specifying debate as a keyword in the tweet list view, we find that the third presidential debate took place on October 22nd, 2013. This presidential debate was also an event in the topic of government and politics during the time interval. The debate mostly focused on the international issues of America. This suggests that the topic government and politics cooperates with international issues to recruit public attention from other topics. Similar observations can be made for the relationship between government and politics and other switching topics. In summary, the topic of government and politics can be assumed to be the driving force that pushes various topics to switch.
So this is an illustration of what we have found in that study. I also did another paper which tries to understand how the evolution of public sentiment towards different social issues will influence with the social media data. It seems that we have examined different relations between social issues on public agenda, the cooperation and the competition and independence. But actually, after that study in 2017, I put a pause on this project, but I didn't forget about this project. And there are several limitations with our own studies. And first is the methodological limitations. We just use the social media data. And as we all know, social media data cannot represent the whole population. And so that means the external validity of our findings can be problematic. And also, for the issues we study in these two empirical cases, we define the issue space by our own. That means we may have our own personal bias in defining social issues. And so this issue space may not be complete, may be biased. And also both studies, the data of both studies come from a very convenient time frame, is the presidential election in the United States. As you may know, that presidential election in the United States, everything can be abnormal and it's not a typical period, right? And also in these studies, we always operationalize the inter-issue relations as a time constant estimates. But we all know the public agenda is a dynamic process. So that means the inter-issue relationship should also be varying over time. It's not a time invariant, it should be time changing. So this is the methodological limitations. More importantly, in these two studies, we still feel that we don't have a coherent theoretical framework to organize our ideas. So basically, what is competition and what is cooperation? We didn't have a rigorous definition about that. And also, the level issues in competition or the cooperation, whether you are talking about the competition and cooperation at the issue level or at the dyadic level. So that means you look at a pair of issues, or it can be a higher level. Because in ecological theories, the competition can exist at different levels. It can be at the species level, it can be the community level, at the system level. And also, in addition to the cooperation and the competition, whether there are any other forms of inter-issue relationship on public agenda, and what are the driving forces behind these forms of inter-issue relationships on public agenda. And so these are the questions in our mind when we did that three studies. So in the pandemic in 2020, and when a lot of scholars are working with COVID-19, I don't think I can contribute anything new to that line of research. So I retake this program and I try to figure out some new perspective to understand the public agenda dynamics. And so after reading a lot of literature, and I found that the ecological perspective may be a good one to organize our previous studies and also to explore some new directions here. In the ecosystem or the ecological perspective, we can have an ecosystem, and each ecosystem will have different communities. And within different communities, we can have a population. And so if we translate this kind of mapping between the ecological system and the subsystems, and we can easily build an ecosystem of public agenda. So we have an overall public agenda, and under this public agenda, we can have different issue systems, including different social issues. And in each system, we can have different issues. And different issues, we can have different frames, right? So this is we call it the second level agenda setting or the third level agenda setting framing. Of course, there are some debate whether framing can be considered as a second level agenda setting. So this is another debate. But we think we can use this kind of ecological perspective to approach this research question. And following the ecological thinking perspective, we think we can conceptualize the inter-issue relationship in multiple ways. Say, for example, if we have two issues here, issue A and issue B, and these two issues, over time, their public attention on two issues will either growing or leveling. So that means it will level off or the declining. So in all these, say, for example, these second, fourth, fifth, and sixth, and eighth, they are all independent with each other. So that means these two issues, no matter another issue, how it changes, it will not influence the other issues. So these are all independent, right? So this is very straightforward. And for the competition is also has been widely studied. If the rise of public attention on one issue will lead to the decline of public attention on another issue. So this is the competition. And what we found in the ecological perspective is another phenomenon, is these two. We call this as the internecine. So the public attention on these two issues, here they will co-grow, and these two, they will co-decline. But if you use a correlation to quantify the relationship between these two time series, all of them will be positive, right? Because they are demonstrating the same trend, either co-grow up or co-decline. So it will be a positive correlation. But in the past, we will say if it is a positive correlation, we will all say it is cooperation. But this actually possible it can be internecine. So that means both will decline public attention. So based on this schema, and we think there can be 4 types of relationship between social issues: independence, cooperation, competition, and internecine. So this is our overall framework to quantify the inter-issue relationships. And so our research question is, what is the distribution of these four types of inter-issue relationships in the issue ecosystem? And is the issue ecosystem primarily competitive or cooperative? So that means what's the dominant type of inter-issue relationship in the issue ecosystem? And how do issue competitiveness and the cooperativeness between social issues, they will evolve over time? And so this is the ecological organizational ecology literature. They also argue that there can be competition, independence, and the cooperation and the internecine. And they propose some mechanisms or the basis that can allow the social issues to compete or cooperate. Say, for example, whether there is a structural factor there and the shared affective relationship between 2 social issues. So this one can be related to the semantic similarity we use to quantify. We argue that is the underlying mechanism and also the identity of the different social issues. In addition to quantify the distribution of 4 types of inter-issue relationships, in this study, we also want to propose a kind of explanatory mechanism. And because we try to look at the issue public attention dynamics over an extended period of time, we need to find some explanatory mechanism that can work over time. So after we do some literature review, we find that there is a theory of value orientation. It was proposed by Ronald Inglehart. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about his name, Inglehart, but if I mention the survey, and you will know it, it's the World Value Survey. And so that's the most ambitious cross-sectional survey about the cultural values in the world, I think starting from 1990s. And that survey was funded by Ronald Inglehart. He argued that in the past decades, since the industrialization of the American society, there is a shift of very materialistic orientation to post-materialistic orientation. So materialistic orientation means we put a lot of emphasis to satisfy our physiological needs. While for the post-materialistic orientation means we want to pursue higher social goals like the diversity, like equity, like inclusiveness, like the self-fulfillment. And some communication scholars, they have already integrated this value orientation into their empirical studies of public issues. Say, for example, Lance Hobart. And he argued that different social issues, they can differ in their underlying value orientations. Some social issues, they address more materialistic needs, like national defense. So it is about our physical security, right? But for some social issues, they are more post-materialistic orientation. They emphasize spiritual values and individual self-expression, like current environmentalism, right? And so it's about a kind of harmonious relationship between nature and the human, and also about the gender relations. This is more a post-materialistic issue. And so based on this theory, and what we try to argue that the materialistic issues, they are more likely to compete with one another because the niche overlap among those materialistic issues is very, very large and is very, very big because all of them are about the basic human needs, right? So this will trigger the competition between the materialistic issues. While for the post-materialistic issues, because most of these post-materialistic issues, they have a kind of shared goals. Of course, their sub-goals may be different, but the overall aim is quite similar. So the shared goals and the shared identity among post-materialistic issues will make them more likely to cooperate with each other. While the competitiveness between a materialistic issue and a post-materialistic issue is expected to lie between these two extremes. So this is our first hypothesis. And also, this is just the aggregate level hypothesis. And we also want to bring the individual level attributes into our study. And so we consider two fundamental variables in our study. One is education and the other is political partisanship. Why we choose these two? Because as we all know, education is highly related to the cognitive capacity of an individual being, right? And the better you are educated, the more cognitive capacity you can have. So that means you have more bandwidth to process multiple social issues. Well, for the political partisanship, this is also a very important variable in American society, is that we know that Democrats and the Republicans, they have quite different cognitive style. And the Republicans, they are more rigid in terms of their cognitive perception, and they just stay with their own idea no matter what happened around them. And they are very stubborn and very difficult to persuade, to convince, right? While for the Democrats, they are more open to different kinds of new ideas. So that's what we propose here. And the issue cooperation is greater than issue competition among individuals with a high education level, while issue competition is greater than issue cooperation among individuals with a low education level. And issue cooperation is greater than issue competition among Democrats, whereas issue competition is greater than issue cooperation among Republicans. And we also argue that these two, education and the political partisanship, they will interact with one another to influence the inter-issue relationship. So this is our overall theoretical concern. And in this study, and because we have tried the large-scale social media data, Twitter data, in our own research, we know the limitations there. And to be honest with you, I'm a bit tired of the social media data analytics nowadays. And so during the pandemic, I go back to my old skills and we try to use the public opinion polling data. And so what I use is a very famous public opinion polling data in the United States is the Gallup's most important problem in the society. And so we call it the MIP polls. So the wording of that question is, what is the most important problem facing the country in your mind? Okay, so Gallup started to ask this question in early 1950s. Okay, so I compiled all the Gallup MIP polls starting from 1958 to 2020. And so this includes a data set of about 365. Wow, 365. Yeah, I just realized this magic number. And 365 qualified polls in our data. And so these data sets include more than 500,000 individual responses in the past 6 decades in the United States. This MIP polls, because it expands over 6 decades. So in 1950s, of course, the MIP, the most important problem reported by the respondents will be definitely different from what we reported now, right? So I recode all the raw issues into 13 categories. And like I mentioned here, it includes economy, health, international relations, law and order, spending, welfare, and also education and technology, environment, ethical relations, immigration, politics, race, and social relations. So I recode the raw issue. I think the raw categories in our data set include more than 200 categories. So I recode them into 13. So I think because these issues nominated, reported by the respondents from a representative sample, I think this is a quite complete issue ecosystem for the US public agenda. Of course, you may argue that, hey, some social issues is not here, say, for example, sports. Do you think sports is an important social issue? And to me, I think yes, but entertainment can also be, right? But in this Unfortunately, in MIP post, they didn't include the sports. If yes, and that maybe more than half of the respondents will say, hey, sports is something important, okay? Anyway, we also categorize these 13 issues into two groups based on their value orientation. And say, for example, these 6 issues, we consider them as the materialistic issues because they are more focusing on the security and the survival goals that can be achieved by material means. That means you have the money, you have the resources, you can do it, right? And we have these 7 issues. We consider them as the post-materialistic issues because most of these social issues, they are emphasizing the autonomy and the quality of life aspects. And so they are prioritizing goals such as the self-expression and the environmental harmoniousness and the gender equality and diversity, something like that. Okay. So the basic idea in our study is that we build a time series of public attention on these 13 issues. So we have 13 time series, and each time series includes 365 time points, okay? Because this is a longitudinal study over 60 years, okay? And so, as I just mentioned, in our previous studies, we didn't consider the inter-issue relations between 2 social issues as a time-varying estimates. So in this study, we tried a new, actually it's not a completely new, it's a relatively new to our field. It's a time series framework we call as the dynamic conditional correlation. And so this was heavily used in econometrics. And so the dynamic conditional correlation can give you a time-varying estimates on the correlation between 2 time series over time. So that means the correlation, say, for example, between economy and the health, these 2 social issues, it can be 0.8 in 1958, it can be 0.7 in 1972 in the survey, okay? DCC, it was developed under the framework of Gauge. And if you are familiar with the econometrics, you should be very familiar with these terms. But basically, you can interpret this as a correlation. But the correlation is the dynamic one. Yeah, DCC estimates of selected pairs of social issues. Say, for example, in this one, relationship between international and ethics, most of the time is not significant. They are randomly fluctuate around 0. Right? And so that means these 2 issues, they are completely independent from each other. And also, say, for example, for the international issue and economy, and they are negatively correlated. So that means they are competing with each other. While for the politics and the ethics, in a lot of the times, in a lot of situations, they are positively correlated. And also like the social relations and the laws, they are also positively correlated, okay? So this is the illustration. And so our findings is not that surprising. And so what we find is that in the overall ecosystem of public issues, the competitive cooperative ratio is nearly about 5-3. So that means we argue that the overall issue ecosystem is essentially a competitive space with multiple inter-issue relations. They can cooperate with each other, but they compete more. So this is our basic conclusion. And also what we find is the competitive to cooperative ratio in the ecosystem remains very stable over the past 6 decades. Because we fit a linear line or non-linear line to the competitive to cooperative ratio over time, we didn't find any significant pattern there. So actually, this is a quite surprising finding to us because our feeling that our society become more and more competitive, right? So we face a lot of competition, competitive pressure from others. But it turns out, hey, it's not that the case. Our human society is quite stable. The issue ecosystem is quite a stable system. And we just run a chi-square test to see if the distribution of inter-issue relationship in the ecosystem for public issues varies significantly by the value orientation of issues. We found, yes, there is a very significant difference there, right? And it is also consistent with our hypothesis. And issue that has with 2 post-materialist issues, they are more likely to compete with each other. While for issue that with two post-materialistic issues, they are more likely to cooperate with each other. Okay. And with regards to the individual level analysis, I should say this is a group level analysis. So first, this one is we decomposed our sample into 6 groups based on the education degree and the political partisanship. So it's a 2x3 and combination. So we have these 6 groups. As you can see, the distribution of inter-issue relationships across these 6 groups are quite similar. So materialistic issues, they are more likely to compete with each other than cooperate with each other, no matter which social groups you are in. And for the post-materialistic issues, they are more likely to compete with each other. And for the post-materialistic and the materialistic issue, they lie between these 2 extremes. And what's interesting is here, and we run an OS regression to see how the competitive to cooperative ratio will grow over time and how this growth will be conditioned by their partisanship. And so what we found here is that the Democrats and the independents, their competitive to cooperative ratio shows a significant declining trend. So that means in the issue ecosystem of Democrats and independents, they are becoming more and more cooperative in social issues. Well, for the Republicans, as I just mentioned, they are very, very stubborn, right? Their change is not significant at all. They're just rigid. So this is consistent with the previous literature about the cognitive rigidity or the plasticity between Democrats and the Republicans. So that actually in the United States, most of the independents, I should say, they are more leaning towards the Democrats rather than the Republicans. So that's why these 2 are very similar to each other. So this is the 3-way interaction between partisanship and education level and the value orientation of social issues. So this is what we have done so far, from zero-sum competition to ecological perspective to understand the public agenda dynamics. I think this ecological perspective opened a new line of research for me to further pursue this research question, because there are a lot of unknowns. Some of the unknowns are known to me. Say, for example, what we found is that there are the competition to cooperation is a balanced one over time, right? But we still don't know what is the tipping point in the cooperate and compete balance, and what time will drive 2 issues to compete, and what time point it will drive them to cooperate. And so this is one direction we'd like to pursue. And the second is in our study, value orientation of social issues is considered as a binary one. Either they are materialistic or post-materialistic. But actually, as argued by Ronald Inglehart, is that value orientation should be a continuum rather than a discrete one. So how can we handle this in our study? This is a challenge, because how can we measure the value orientation of social issues? And we are thinking about a kind of way to use the social media data again to capture this value orientation as a continuous variable. And also, when we submit our paper to communication research, and some reviewers, they suggested us to consider another issue property they call as the issue ownership. And so this was a concept proposed by those political scientists, and they think some issues are owned by certain parties. Say, for example, like abortion or like gun control in the United States, maybe they can be owned by Republicans or owned by Democrats. This ownership does not mean that they own these issues. That means that they have more voice on this topic. I think this is a very interesting perspective to pursue, because issue ownership can be considered as a kind of shared identity on the social issue. So this is one line of research. Of course, we are talking about ecological perspective. We always need to think about the relationship between ecology and individual audience or individual public, right? And so what we try to do is how the selectivity process of each individual being in a society will lead to the cooperation and competition between social issues. And also, how the issue ecosystem constructed by the individuals. Each individual in the society, you will have an issue ecosystem in your mind, and you will group some social issues together, and sometimes you will decouple some social issues. So that means everybody will have a mental representation of social issues in your mind. And so our next step is to use this kind of network perspective to try to develop issue network for each individual. And then we will try to see how this each individual network will give rise to a collective network at the ecosystem level. In our study so far, we focus on the public agenda as an issue ecosystem. But this issue ecosystem can be considered as a subsystem of bigger social environment. And so this is what Dr. Max McCombs, when I sent our paper to him, he encouraged us to think about how the public agenda, what we examine public agenda as an issue ecosystem, will interact with media agenda as an ecosystem, and also policy agenda as an ecosystem. So we have these three big ecosystems here. And how the interaction between social issues in one ecosystem will be transferred or be resisted by the other ecosystems. In our study, nowadays in the United States, polarization is a big thing. And in our study, we don't have the data because Gallup didn't have this measure in his survey. And so what we try to do is bring this kind of social media measure of the ideological polarization and match it with the public opinion polling data to see how the dynamics of the ideological polarization will couple with the public agenda dynamics in this study. So these are some known research questions we plan to pursue in our research. And of course, there are more unknown unknowns in this line of research. So if any of you are interested, I would be more than happy to work with you to continue this line of research. And so, yeah, thanks for your attention.